Hi everyone, welcome to today's interview. Today, me, Oksana from Qubit Labs, and Daniel McGlynn will talk about some of the hottest topics in the world of decentralized tech. It's NFT, Web3, Layer 2 solutions, and more. We'll also touch on how institutions are embracing crypto, the impact of countries adopting it, and the ways to make cryptocurrency more sustainable and how to make blockchain more sustainable. So, Daniel, can you please introduce yourself and tell us more about what you do?
Sure. So my name's Daniel McGlynn. I'm based in California, and I've been writing about cryptocurrencies and related topics, decentralized tech, for going on almost 10 years now. So before that, I was a magazine journalist, and I was really interested in science and technology. And along the way, I started writing about crypto. I had an early assignment about digital currencies when they first kind of appeared, and people were not sure at all, like if they're even legit or if it was kind of a fad or a phase. But I wrote that story, and it was really intriguing for me because, um, as we'll talk about during this interview, like cryptocurrencies um, are really connected to a lot of different things going on right now in terms of, um, how our internet technologies are working, or how finance is changing, and how people are gaining access to information, and how ownership of information is changing. And all of that stuff is really kind of interesting to me. So in my mind, there's like endless things to cover and talk about and write about. And that's actually been true over the past 10 years. The way we even talk about cryptocurrencies has changed like so much. When it first came out, like Bitcoin first came out, it was all about peer-to-peer, just simple trading and having money that was kind of internet native, and those narratives about that. And then, of course, we saw Ethereum launch, and then we saw a whole bunch of other, altcoins or different kinds of tokens launch, and then there's been different movements or chapters or narratives since then. Things we'll talk about today, like DeFi, and then NFTs and Web3, and all these are kind of um, new systems based on Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, but they keep evolving and emerging and blending and changing, and then changing to like how we think about the internet now. So it's to me, it's like endlessly fascinating. So I currently I work for various crypto companies or Web3 companies, helping them either tell stories or create content. And then I also publish a weekly newsletter, which I call Open Money, which is kind of like I see that as like a way to connect all these dots and all these different threads about what's going on right now.
That's Thank you for intro. Well, I think that we can then start with DeFi, which has been transforming the financial world. Could you please briefly remind us what is it and how it impacts traditional financial services, how it connected with crypto?
Sure. So DeFi is short for decentralized finance, and it the basic idea is to whenever you have financial systems, and this has been like the case for hundreds or thousands of years since like we first started minting coins, but um, there's always like layers in the financial system, and a lot of times those layers between the people and companies and organizations and even governments that control money, and then the people that actually use the money, all these layers between those two create expense and just time. It takes a lot of time sometimes. Like even today, if you were to like wire money from one bank to another, it takes several days, and sometimes it comes at an expense. You have to pay for that wire. Um, and so in some ways that's like equivalent to snail mail or sending a letter in the mail where you need a stamp. And so like there's all these multiple layers. And so DeFi is basically like how do you make money operate at the speed of the internet and the scale of the internet. So the idea is you pull out all those layers and just make it way easier and cheaper and faster for people to send money back and forth, or to be able to access financial products. So in some parts of the world, having a bank account or a credit card is still a challenge. And then in other parts of the world, having access to financial products that are more sophisticated for advanced trading or taking advantage of these new protocols and networks as they launch, like DeFi helps people be able to really leverage that. And instead of having to go through really formalized and really financial institutions with lots of layers and time and bureaucracy and cost associated. So what that looks like is on some levels, DeFi, there are ways that you can, with a simple crypto wallet, you can access things like credit or lending. So you can use your cryptocurrencies or your digital assets as collateral, and then maybe take out a loan or lend it to someone else and then earn money on that, like a yield, like you would with a traditional bank. So those are some of the basic things. Other DeFi protocols and projects allow people to kind of take advantage of staking, which is part of how Ethereum works, where you can put up money or stake money, and then you are involved in the consensus, like you are part of the consensus node. So you're sort of like part of how the network works. And so there's ways through DeFi protocols to take advantage of being involved in staking, where you can earn the yield, so you get like a small percentage back for having that money locked in staking. But then you can do things with that money while it's being staked, and so DeFi starts to get a little bit complicated when you start to do these more advanced techniques, and obviously it's really risky too. And so like we hear a lot of stories about people losing lots of money in advanced like DeFi trading, or the other risk associated with DeFi is all of this is based on smart contracts. So it's all based on how blockchains are talking to one another, or even how if you have assets and you're staking and then you're pulling that out to put it somewhere else, like that's all done via smart contract, which is great in terms of efficiency, and it lowers the overhead and takes out some of those layers we were talking about earlier. But there's also risk associated with that. Some of those smart contracts turns out they're buggy, or they're easily exploited. And so for sure it should be clear that DeFi has a lot of promise in terms of disrupting traditional finance, but it also has a lot of risk. And so that's kind of where we are right now. That's sort of what makes it really interesting right now, is because it's like in this growth phase of like, what will happen. And it's growing and has a lot of promise and potential, but still is not super secure yet. So that's why, when you're getting involved in some DeFi projects, it's really good to be cautious and kind of check the security and understand, your exposure. But yeah, but also really interesting. And I think the end goal is really, like I was saying, is just simplify things. Even though sometimes DeFi feels really complicated, ultimately it will make it simpler so that you can handle money and engage in transactions and do all kinds of banking just through like a simple interface, on your phone or on your computer. And yeah, so
I have a question about the risks. Do you associate them more with the smart contracts, so with technology, or this is more risks that people use, like scammers or other people who want to take advantage of people who like to trade and to risk, they take advantage. So is this like social problem, or this is like the
tech.
technological problem that has some not advanced as it should be to protect
Yeah,
users?
yeah, I think it's both still. Because a lot of times, like in the industry, there's this term like being rugged, where people will create um, like DeFi products or a new kind of DeFi service that sounds really incredible. Like, oh, you can earn, this like level of yield that you can't yet earn anywhere else doing like staking or something. And there's been different, different promises made, I guess, and different different rugs over time. And so this is like a common trend that happens, and then all of a sudden the founder or founders or the people associated with that project will just, take the money that's locked in that DeFi protocol and just disappear. And so that's what a rug is, and it happens somewhat frequently. And it's not just a DeFi thing. That's like, a crypto thing in general. So that's definitely something to be cautious of. And the way to kind of insulate from that is to just really do research and figure out like, okay, is this a legitimate project? And it should be no, like there are a lot of really legitimate like stand up like projects that you can vet and you can and do research and understand who the founders are and like how they operate. So there are a lot of trusted or not trusted, but like you know, um, established, I guess, DeFi projects and protocols. But then there's some that are just scams that are developing, and they're taking advantage of this like um, kind of fast and loose mentality and making promises that are too good to be true, and they often are. And then there is that component. The other part of that question is there is a tech issue with the smart contracts, and that is actually a fascinating issue within the space, and people are actively trying to figure out new solutions to that to make to basically get around the issue of bridges or other smart contract issues that are definitely vulnerable to hacks and attacks. I think that will be a major development. In the next few years, is just making kind of the rails that DeFi operate on way more secure and safe. But at the same time, there's always this trade-off, like within DeFi or within crypto broadly, about like security versus cost, versus like interoperability. Like, there's all these things that the protocols are trying to optimize for, which is what makes it complicated on the back end. But those are all situations or things that people are actively working on to make better, and ultimately that will result in like a better user experience, kind of like that vision we were talking about, where it's just like you hop on an app and you can easily, do advanced trading, or you can send money wherever and for like, almost no cost. um, that's all coming, and there's a lot of interesting things happening in the back end, to make that sort of vision and a reality.
And I also had this question: does governments uh, try to take um, the rule over DeFi, how to ask it correctly,
Yeah.
to navigate it, to maybe make some rules for this sector?
Yeah.
How is the communication between companies that develop DeFi products for users and government, which is very much into regulating
Yep.
bank sector, but
Yep.
they regulate DeFi?
Yeah, I mean, um, that's another big thing that's happening now, is like how do you regulate these systems? And it varies a lot from different jurisdictions. Different countries have different financial laws. Um, I'm based in the US, so in the US, there's been a lot over the past few years to um, kind of crack down on DeFi sector and crypto sector, and from the industry side, there's been a lot of calls for like, okay, give us like clear regulations and clear laws that we can follow. Um, and then from the government side, there's been a lot of just like confusion about what some of this technology is and how it works. And so I think that's getting worked through, like that finding that right balance between like what the industry wants and what like where the technology is and where it's headed, and then um, good consumer protection laws to make sure that we can um, operate safely with these new kinds of technologies. And I would say like right now it's still very much like people are trying to figure that out on multiple jurisdictions, but especially in the US. I think one thing that is interesting is that there already are a lot of financial laws and regulations on the books about like how money can move and how governments track money, um, and so one thing is that um, you know, you can do all these things in DeFi, but eventually if you want to, or in crypto, but eventually if you want to actually like convert your digital assets to, you know, government dollars, like that's where that's where a lot of the laws and regulations could kind of come into effect is like, um, you know, at what point do you have like the digital dollars versus like, you know, financial money, or I mean, government-backed money, and so that's kind of an interesting interplay too. But for sure, some of those financial laws don't really make some of those old financial laws don't really make a ton of sense with like the new financial technology. So it's an interesting thing, and hopefully there could be a better dialogue between innovators and engineers actually building these technologies and regulators and lawmakers, um, to try to understand the technologies, and then also a dialogue between the people who are innovating, understanding like why all these financial laws exist in the first place. And so for sure that's another whole wrinkle. You know, we talked about just the technology emerging and developing, but like it's not happening in a bubble or vacuum. And especially when you start talking about financial technologies, there is a massive like legal and regulatory component.
It's very interesting, actually. The the very last question about DeFi. So for regular user, maybe it's a not very accurate comparison, but just from the perspective, um, what is so what is the value? Um, what is the value behind the cryptocurrency in decentralized finance? I mean, we went from gold to paper money, which
Mhm.
has some value behind it. Um, how it's made, I don't know. Like, how would you explain this economical theme to a person who doesn't understand, like, what's cryptocurrency, how it's earned, and how what on what value it's based, like that.
Yeah, I think one easy way to explain it or to think about it, is that, you know, we use the internet every day for important stuff, right? Like emails and working, and you know, a lot of us create things on the internet, even though we don't really think of it like that, through like social media and posting photos, and um, you know, a lot of our life is moving online and into digital realms, and we are creating a lot of stuff in that process, and a lot of that stuff has value. Um, and so, you know, on a daily basis, almost all day, a lot of us are using the internet and building out these networks and creating that value on the internet. And so, I think, like from a very high level, what's interesting about crypto to me is that it's a way for us to start owning these networks. And like they're internet networks, information networks, financial networks, all these networks with different possibilities. But the way that they're structured, it allows people to own them, own pieces of these networks as we create them, and own it through a system of wallet and a system of keys. And so there's like a secure way for me to verifiably say like, okay, I own this fraction of the network, or you know, I own these assets on this network, whether, you know, if I'm minting NFTs, which we're going to talk about in a minute, or other assets on these networks. And so that's never really been possible before. um, you know, you mentioned like gold and money, and that was all created, and then we get to use it. So we that is a network too, like an analog network maybe, but you participate in that network, but you're never really owning it. You're just kind of exchanging back and forth and hoping to extract value through the exchange. Whereas this is just it's like a different shift of like, okay, well, as the internet continues to be built out, that's another thing. I think a lot of people think the internet's like a static thing. Like we got to this certain point where we had email and we have Google and we have search and we have all this stuff, and that's like the farthest it's going to go. But the internet is actually still like continuing to mature and develop and evolve. And the next evolution or the next phase of maturity is really people being able to individually own and contribute to these networks. And as more cryptocurrencies and more DeFi protocols emerge, like it gives us more choice and more optionality to decide like how we want to participate. And um, the cool thing is like people won't be able to dictate like how you want to go about that. It'll just whatever makes sense to you or whatever you're drawn to, like um, you can find those options and then participate in those networks. And then as those networks grow, you also get to benefit from that. So you participate in growing these networks, and then you, as an owner, become it benefits you. And so even if that's kind of one aspect, right? But even if you're not holding these assets long term, all of what I just explained, like that idea of people being able to individually own and contribute to these networks, like it still provides that's kind of like the the base layer, the ownership layer, but then on top of that, there's like the service layer of like all these cool things will happen because of that ownership layer instead of a centralized bank controlling and owning and minting all the money. Um, as protocols start to do that, or different crypto projects start to do that, then all of a sudden all these other services like DeFi start to emerge because they can take advantage of the speed and the cost and the scale um, of those underlying protocols, and then all these new things happen. Kind of like the same way back, 20 years ago when um, the early internet happened, and then all of a sudden, because people were getting online and using the early internet, all of a sudden email popped up because that became a useful service, and then chat, and then from there eventually mobile, and then it's kind of the same thing happening, but with financial technologies is sort of the first thing. But now we're seeing that was like the early days. Now we're seeing all these other movements kind of following along because as you can share value really easily, like in a text message or an email, um, then all of a sudden you're able to do other things like create NFTs or engage in DeFi protocols or do other kinds of interesting things that weren't possible before.
Talking about NFTs, it was like a NFT boom two years ago,
Yeah,
I guess. Then
yeah.
it went a little bit easier, and now I guess it's what are the future of NFT? What are the trends? How do you see the development of the market?
Yeah. So NFTs are really fascinating. So NFT is short for non-fungible token, which basically means um, before, like, let's use Bitcoin as an example. Like when Bitcoin is created, you could use any other Bitcoin, like back and forth. Like one Bitcoin was as good as another, and like in one individual part of a Bitcoin is as good as another in terms of like exchanging back and forth. Kind of like how dollars work or whatever currency you have, it doesn't matter. You don't have a specific dollar bill that you go and exchange for like a specific product. It's like any dollar bill will work for any other dollar bill. Um, so that's fungibility, and that's part of like why money works because if you had like a dollar bill with a certain serial number was more valuable than another dollar bill with a different serial number, like all of a sudden changing dollar bills would get really complicated. So that's kind of how crypto worked for a long time until NFTs came along. And NFTs are basically like you can um, create a digital asset with like um, that is unique and verifiably unique. And then that becomes one of a kind of thing. And so all of a sudden that becomes really um, useful for people who are like collectors or artists because they could say like, um, before if I created a piece of digital art, like it was easily copied and it could be distributed without my knowledge but that was the problem with like creating anything online is it's like people copy and paste and replicate. But now with NFTs or non-fungible tokens, you could create something that was one of a kind and like ascribe that one of a kind value to that digital artifact. So the first kind of wave of NFTs was like all kinds of digital art and collectibles, um, that happened a couple years ago during the last kind of crypto boom. NFTs all of a sudden like popped up and people were collecting them and the values of them were like skyrocketing, to the point where it like kind of made no sense. Like this is, you buy a pudgy penguin and it would be worth like thousands of dollars and it's like, what is happening? Um, but it was really cool, I think, to show like how that whole system could work. And there was definitely like a hype phase of NFTs, and a lot of that has kind of like come back to earth. A lot of those values have since deflated, and like things that were once worth, pudgy penguins that were worth like thousands of dollars are not worth thousands of dollars anymore. But I think what it showed is the value of this process of minting and creating unique digital artifacts and digital artwork and collectibles, um, and even just ironing out the process of how to like mint something and put it in your wallet and create a wallet and then um, do all the steps that you need to do to create an NFT, or non-fungible token. And so um, I think now what we're seeing is that people and even companies and brands are using NFTs in new ways to engage their audience, or um, even create content. And as people move on chain, we call it, start using blockchains, or that movement on chain, NFTs are playing a big role in that. And it could even be like there's an app that I wrote about recently that is like, you can document your workouts, your daily like fitness routine, and you could say, you can use a fitness tracker and say like, hey, I ran 5 miles today, and you could take um, that little artifact from that fitness tracker and you could easily create it as an NFT and just kind of prove to people like, hey, I did this, I ran 5 miles. And it's like a low cost thing, costs almost nothing to mint this thing. And then over time you have this record that is now on chain and verifiable. And that's just like, maybe a simple, um, easy way to start using on-chain tools and NFTs. But you can imagine other um, more sophisticated uses coming about, like, um, maybe a company launches a marketing campaign where if you collect like 3 or 5 of their NFTs, you get a certain reward. Or, um, you know, you could imagine maybe in school, like if you had to do like write 5 papers for a college course and you had to mint them as NFTs and prove that like I did these 5 at these certain times. And then, like, I don't know, there's like a million use cases for why people would want to use these verifiable means
It's like
of
records you cannot change, correct? So that's the idea of blockchain, that you cannot go back to the system and change the number, or like
yeah,
or
yeah, you can't like, yeah, undo the NFT. And so yeah, that's part of one of the huge components of moving on chain, is like on chain just means like you're using a digital ledger that is like can't be altered once these records are created, um, which is great for a lot of reasons. And then also creates other issues like, oh well, sometimes it's nice, like people make mistakes, like go back and edit stuff. But there'll be ways to figure that out. Maybe you mint a new NFT, or whatever it might be. And so yeah, so there, like, you could imagine a lot of different use cases where having some kind of verifiable record that can't be undone, and is useful, right? So I think NFTs are really interesting, and they're going through this like interesting change from that initial hype, where like everybody was going crazy and they were, all this money was being spent on NFTs, to now like that's all faded, and people are like actually using them for lots of interesting stuff. Even like you can join memberships, like online groups, and you like mint an NFT almost like as a pass, right? And then that allows you to become part of this group. So yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff happening for sure. And we'll see where that all goes.
Okay, thank you. Let's then move on to the Web3 and decentralized applications. Um, Decentralized social media platforms are gaining more attention now,
Yep.
but can you tell us how they differ from traditional, and what maybe there are some challenges of creating them, and how do you see the future of those social media platforms and applications?
Yeah, so I think the big thing that we talked a lot about DeFi earlier, and some of those principles of leveraging the internet scale to make things more accessible and faster and cheaper, and kind of like decoupling from the traditional structures of power or all those layers we were talking about in the financial system. That applies to a lot of things. So we're seeing these like big movements of decentralizing other power structures or other monopolies. Um, and so that's happening in DeFi, it's happening in something like social media, it's happening in science and research, it's happening in a lot of different places where the idea is like, how can we more easily connect like the creators of things and the consumers of things and not have to go through all these other layers. So um, we're seeing that in social media more and more because there's been a lot of issues with traditional social media. Mainly, all this user generated content is being created, but the users aren't necessarily benefiting. It's just like we're helping create these massive ad networks, and then we're being targeted and like fed these ads and like tracked all over the internet, just so our attention all of a sudden becomes really valuable, or the algorithms that power some traditional social media is like changing how we think about things, and so there's a lot of various issues with the way that traditional social media and media is controlled. And so like one alternative is like, how do we decentralize that or break up those power structures? And will that create an alternative that is like more beneficial for a lot of people? And that's kind of the question, is like, will it will it be better, or does it create other issues and challenges? So how that works, and like just for more context, like we're seeing this like play out right now in front of us, like with Telegram that has almost a billion users across the world, and just last week the founder of Telegram was arrested or detained in France, and like all of a sudden, like because of that, like all these stories are emerging about like we thought when we were using Telegram that it was encrypted and safe, but it turns out maybe only parts of it are. And so there's like all these various layered issues. And then Twitter in Brazil is like, there's a big legal issue. And so like access to Twitter in Brazil is being cut off this week. So, or last week. So um, all of these challenges that lead us to like, okay, what's the alternative? And so one of the alternatives is decentralized social media. And basically what that means is using these same kinds of networks that we're describing, like crypto networks, um, or on-chain networks, and making it so that when a user kind of logs onto a decentralized social media platform, instead of going through like a centralized server that is controlled by a company, you can use a wallet or other credentials like keys to access a platform that really nobody owns. And instead of having a centralized company build all the functionality, different developers can create clients or apps, and then you can engage in those apps and clients using your credentials that you own. And so what that means, you reduce the platform risk. So like let's say I lived in Brazil, and all of a sudden my centralized social media was cut off. I could just take my, if I was doing decentralized social media, I could take my wallet and just kind of plug into a new client and I can still have all the information that I've created and a lot of my profile and other things, and I can like kind of access that social graph more easily through um, another client. Like so it makes like data portability and data ownership way easier through decentralized social media opposed to centralized social media. And it gives me as a creator more opportunities to like monetize my content or just kind of plug into all these different decentralized clients. So it kind of puts me more in control of the things that or it gives me more power over all of that content that I'm creating on social media. So that's one of the big advantages. And as that takes off conceptually, and there's all these different decentralized services, the next phase will be like, okay, let's make it easier to plug in and you know, called interoperability, but like make it easier to move from one thing to another. And so that a lot of these risks and challenges from that traditional media like are mitigated. Of course, there's new risks. Like I have to kind of do my own research and make sure um, you know, the clients I'm using are doing the things they're saying they're doing. But one of the benefits or one of the like the big great things about decentralized applications is they're built open source, so they're like a little bit more easy to vet than like, you know, we don't know all the um, components that go into a centralized private company and like, you know, how they're handling their data and all that kind of stuff. But we do have more visibility um, into things that are built out in the open and that we can vet and do research on. So that's kind of one of the major draws for a lot of people.
Thank you for such a answer. Um, let's move to the blockchain scalability and
Yeah.
talk about layer two solutions. They are often mentioned as a way to solve the challenges of scalability. Could you please explain what is it and how do they improve blockchain scalability? And what are successful implementation there on the market?
Yeah, so layer twos are this kind of new concept where when blockchain first came out, they were kind of what we now call monolithic blockchains or like these just base layer like Bitcoin and Ethereum. And the the thing about those base layer, those monolithic chains is they were responsible for like a layer one was responsible for handling all parts of this on-chain process. So they had to have the data availability, they had to handle the transactions quickly, and they had to be super secure and had to also do this at very low cost so that people would use them on regular transactions. And so what we saw over time is more and more people were using blockchain. Like it was hard to check all those boxes because either you would give up security and then people would lose their assets and that was not good, or all of a sudden transactions would get backed up and so the cost would go up, or you know, data would not be available at all times. So then like, you know, that creates more congestion and complexity. And so these layer two solutions are basically designed to like abstract some of those responsibilities of the layer one blockchain and still be able to achieve things like security and transaction costs. And so like a lot of layer twos are really designed to like how do we make transactions, how do we make it easier to do transactions faster and cheaper so that like we can use crypto and digital assets for like all kinds of things. And so that's actually happening now. It's like a really interesting time. All layer two solutions are kind of blowing up. They're like a really popular thing. And so we've moved from this like situation of monolithic blockchain to more like modular, and modular being like that different parts of that whole blockchain process are handled at different layers of the stack. And so with again the idea of making transactions faster and then just blockchain more usable. And so one great example of like a layer two solution that's like super popular right now and taken off and like all these builders are attracted to it is called Base, and that's launched by Coinbase, which is a big crypto exchange. based here in the US. And so Base is a project of Coinbase, and they have made it so that when you're sending crypto or over Base or using Base, it's super cheap, it's fast, it's easy to use. And so developers are now creating applications and different services on Base to take advantage of those things. And so where that goes, again, nobody knows, but right now I would say that's a great success story for Layer 2. It's brought in all this new attention and all these new developers and people that had ideas for maybe a simple app before, but it was like if it cost a lot of money to use their app, like people aren't going to use it. But now because of these Layer 2 things, and kind of abstracting some of the job of a blockchain, but then still using that underlying blockchain to actually be like that sort of data record. Makes Layer 2 make a lot of sense, and then it makes all these like consumer apps make a lot of sense.
That sounds promising for the
Yeah.
blockchains.
Yeah.
Okay, I also like to mention the institutional investment, which have become a major factor in cryptocurrency. So how are these investments shaping the market? Can you please tell?
Yeah. So like I think what we're seeing this past year, again in the US, but also in other places, is institutions are becoming a lot more interested in crypto as a financial asset. And so we've had exchange traded funds. So like before, traditional finance and crypto were like really separated. You either were like, bought stocks and bonds through like a traditional brokerage, or, maybe you got into crypto trading, and they were kind of like very much apart. And now through the launch of exchange traded funds and other financial instruments, we're seeing the possibility of like, you could buy crypto now through an ETF or an exchange traded fund, which is what they're called in the US. Through a traditional brokerage. And then you have exposure to the price movements of crypto. You don't actually own the underlying asset, but like for people who are interested in kind of speculating on the future costs, or for all the reasons we described, like they see, hey, I want to be involved in the building out of these new networks and this new system. They can buy exposure to that through in a traditional brokerage. And so what that means is for institutions, people managing like retirement accounts or pension funds or other kind of massive investment vehicles, now all of a sudden they have a way to participate in crypto through these exchange traded funds. And while it's not direct, not all of those, if you're buying through a brokerage, you're not, you don't have actual custody of Bitcoin or Ethereum. But you're still like participating in the system. And then over time, what I think will happen is, and this is already happening on some levels, is like institutions will have the ability through a company like Coinbase or some of these other bigger exchanges to like actually buy and hold Bitcoin and buy and hold Ethereum. And so then things get really interesting because these assets are scarce, and so like the more people that are buying them, especially big institutions, then the more scarce they become, which means the price should go up. It's like a supply and demand thing, but we'll see. I mean, I think it's also like important to realize that the motivations for institutions getting involved is different than the motivations for some of the early adopters of crypto and digital assets. So how that dynamic plays out, like the speculation and just like the price exposure versus like people who are actually interested in building a new internet, a better internet, like it'll be interesting to see how that all shakes out. But for sure this year, like one of the big stories is like the institutional exposure and successful launch of exchange traded funds.
Yes, and there is a next question, which I guess will be also in this with this topic, that several countries have made headlines by adopting cryptocurrencies as legal tender.
Mhm.
So, do you think more countries might follow this path? How it will influence the global financial system, um, the global financial landscape?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is another big question too, is like, some countries like El Salvador has kind of become famous for adopting Bitcoin as a legal tender in that country, which just means people are free to use it, alongside a national currency to handle transactions, like even things like pay taxes and, handle some of that more formal business. Um, and there's definitely a movement amongst countries to adopt either Bitcoin as legal tender or create their own digital assets as legal tender. I think the Bahamas did something with, I think it's called the sand dollar, where they created their own digital currency to try to take advantage of some of those things we're talking about, like cost and scale and just accessibility. And there was like digital wallets that were associated with both in El Salvador and then in Bahamas, where the government would actually issue these wallets that then people could exchange to digital currencies. So for sure, that's a trend. I don't know like um, if there's any like clear data on like if it's this good or bad for the economy, like national economies. I think it's still like an ongoing experiment, but super interesting. Again, especially like I think crypto is all about giving people alternatives, and governments adopting those alternatives is pretty cool to see, and it'll be cool to see like long term what those impacts are. I think the other thing that's happening that should be mentioned, because I think there's some confusion around it, but like governments are also trying to, they're talking about and researching developing central bank digital currencies, which are different than cryptocurrencies. But it's like um, the government trying to control um, some aspects of what we're talking about. Again, using like internet money and the system of wallets to make money more accessible and transactable. But it would not be that money would not be on an open digital ledger like Bitcoin or Ethereum. It would still be on a closed ledger that's controlled by the government. So that creates a lot of other issues like related to privacy and like, there's a lot of things associated with that. But it is just noteworthy that that is happening now, and it's something to kind of keep an eye on, I think, for people interested in this space of like how digital assets are coming into play, because that will also, if that happens or when it happens at different national levels, like I think that will also have a big impact on just the whole space in general, and it could have some positive impacts and it could have some negative impacts. So it's again a trade-off, like all the things we're talking about. So be interesting for sure.
Yeah, we're still in a process. We'll see how
Yeah,
how it
yeah,
goes. Finally, my last question is about sustainability. We know that blockchain costs some money to write it, and also um, mining and managing all that is known for its high energy consumption.
yep.
If there is a way out of this problem and alternative ways to make it more eco-friendly and more cheap?
Yeah. Well, I think there's kind of a few different ways to split this issue. So let's talk about Bitcoin first. So Bitcoin is like uses proof of work, which is in- intentionally computationally intensive. Like that's how it works. That's why it's so secure, and that's why the network is so great. Is because it is like based on this really intense, energy intensive computation. So a lot of times people say, "Oh, well, Bitcoin's not backed by anything." Well, it's actually backed by a lot of computation and a lot of energy use. So it is actually backed by something. So, um, but there's concerns about that. Like, does that make sense given all the other threats on our planet? Does it make sense to like have this money that is like energy intense and computationally intensive? And I guess one way to think about it is that um, Bitcoin miners, the people that use the computer computation to produce new Bitcoin and to also secure the network, they're always looking for, I mean, just their business model is to find like cheap energy sources. And so they moved to like the sort of edges of this massive energy network in the world. And in some ways, that's really good to have this like kind of portable system that you can move and plug into different places across the globe to take advantage of things where there's a lot of places where sometimes excess energy is produced, like like hydropower. Sometimes during different parts of the year, more energy is produced, and then if it's not the rainy season, like less energy is produced. A lot of Bitcoin projects are taking advantage of things like energy capture, where energy before was wasted, like in the gas fields in Texas and other parts of the US, where gases was just flared off, but now we can capture some of that energy and actually mine Bitcoin with it. Or other places where it's easy to produce an energy in certain parts of the world or certain places, but it's hard to transfer that energy because that's where the cost and the inefficiency comes in. And so Bitcoin is a great technology for like, hey, it's actually great, cheap and easy to produce energy here. And this is a way to capture that as economic energy and then transfer that energy elsewhere through the economy. So that to me is super fascinating. I don't know what the right answer is. And for sure, I'm not trying to portray Bitcoin as like a clean technology. Some people do go that far and say, oh, this is a green technology. I don't think that's the case, but I think it's also not as simple as saying, oh, this is a bad idea because it uses a lot of energy. There's like a disconnect between energy consumption and emissions creations. And so that needs to get sorted out and solved. The other component of this is that Ethereum just last year transferred from, it was also proof of work, so using this like intensive energy or computation and energy, to proof of stake. And so now what that means is it's like the consensus or the way that the network is people are proving that the ledger is real and exists is different now. It's the proof of stake, and so it uses like way less energy, like almost no energy in terms of like where it was before. It still uses energy because it is still a computer network, but instead of using those Bitcoin or those miners and that heavy computation, people are providing financial staking to the network, and that's what's securing it. So like the value of the network is actually securing the network, which kind of connects back to DeFi in some like paths, because now people can use that staking for other things. But so I guess that's a long way of saying there are alternatives, and like this will for sure, it's something people are working on and trying to figure out like what is the best way to do this. And it's like, again, super fascinating. I don't think there's any right or wrong answer. It's just like, how can we be the most efficient with the resources we have, and how can that benefit the most amount of people? And I think that's always where you know, like people are always pushing for that efficiency. And so it'll be interesting over time, like how that all changes. Again, like we started off talking about how like 10 years ago, things were like way different and the narratives were different. Everything was different. Now it's different. I'm sure in 10 years from now, if we had this conversation again, we would look back and be like, wow, so much has changed and so much has happened. And like, again, everything is going to be better, more efficient, easier to use, and more consumer friendly.
That's an idea of building on blockchain.
Yeah.
So that was my last question. Thank you for your time, Daniel.
Yeah.
Guys, if you want to be in trend with cryptocurrency and blockchain, please subscribe to Daniel's blog. We will put the link into the description. And also, I want to remind everyone that we're at Qubit Labs, we're hiring developers. And if you need someone to scale your team, please contact us. That was our episode about blockchain. And I will be happy to see you next time. Thank you, Daniel.
All right. Thank you.